All right, I have finally started reading Don Quixote. It's huge, right? The version that I have is in two volumes, and the volumes are a total of 584 and 624 pages, coming to a total of 1,208 pages. The version I'm reading is from 1885. It is a translation by John Ormsby, and it is known as a fairly thorough or one of the more thorough and accurate translations of the book. In fact, there are about 100 pages of introductory material that include Ormsby's rather humorous comments about other translations of Quixote, a biography of Cervantes, the author, the original author, and a chunk about the creation of Don Quixote itself. So, and actually, the material about the other translations is actually pretty funny. He has a lot of complaints about the other people who have tried to translate Quixote, and he describes it in a rather funny way. Some quotes here. Shelton's racy old version, with all its defects, has a charm that no modern translation, however skillful or correct, could possess. So he likes this old Shelton example. The Shelton translation is from literally the same era as Quixote himself, and Quixote was writing at a time where Shakespeare probably had a copy of Don Quixote and carried it around, Ormsby suggests. Quote, his translation of the first part was very hastily made, in 40 days he says in his dedication, and, as his marginal notes show, never revised by him. It is often very literal, barbarously literal, frequently, but just as often very loose. He had evidently a good colloquial knowledge of Spanish, but apparently not much more. With him, discreto, a chameleon of a word, in its way of taking various meanings according to circumstances, is always discreet. Sucesos, always successes, which it seldom means. Honesto, always honest, which it never means. End quote. He talks about the difficulty of translating a parody, right? And Don Quixote is a satire. It is a satire of the romantic or the chivalrous romances of its time. For instance, Cervantes put 10 pages of poetry at the beginning of it, because that was something that these chivalrous romances did at the time, and all of the poetry that Cervantes has there is generally poking fun at various things. Most of it is kind of closely related to things of the time, and so I'm not going to quote any of those necessarily because it requires a little bit more footnotery to understand them. But Ormsby says this, quote, the dilemma of the translator frequently is this, that terseness is essential to the humor of the phrase or passage, but if he translates, he will not be terse, and if he would be terse, he must paraphrase. End quote. So yeah, this is it's a problem to translate humor, because sometimes turns of phrase or whatever are very hard to actually translate, and Ormsby is talking about this in the prefatory material. He talks about later translations as well. Quote, Phillips imitated Lestrange, parenthetically, Lestrange is a translator who made a popular English version of a different Spanish book, as well as he could, but Lestrange was a clever penman and a humorist after his fashion, while Phillips was only a dull buffoon. His Quixote is not so much a translation as a travesty, and a travesty that for coarseness, vulgarity, and buffoonery is almost unexampled even in the literature of that day. End quote. Or later on he says, quote, to attempt to improve the humor of Don Quixote by an infusion of cockney flippancy and facetiousness, as Moteau's operators did, is not merely an impertinence like larding a sirloin of prize beef, but an absolute falsification of the spirit of the book. End quote. And so that there's a good 30 pages of this, and then another 30 pages of talking about Cervantes' life, and then another 30 pages about the actual production of the book. Now, so far I've read the prefatory matter, which was pretty significant, and also 9 chapters of the actual story. And it's kind of funny because in reading just 9 chapters, I've already heard 2 of the most common Quixote stories that get shown up in modern media. Number 1, the attacks on the windmills, which is super early on in the book. and then the other one where he basically picks a fight with somebody and decides to charge him on his horse. His horse falls over, he falls down, and his armor and stuff is so heavy that he can't get up, and so he's just there in the middle of the road on his back, floundering about and yelling, and the people that he was going to charge at decide to go up to him and basically beat him up while he can't move. So, obviously there's a lot more to this story, and, what we've seen, culturally speaking, what we've seen in parodies or, references in culture that you or I would probably be familiar with is like the tiniest chip off the tip of the iceberg of this gigantic freaking story. The book is a fun idea, right? Back in, I guess it was late 1500s Spain, there were all these romantic chivalry books, and basically the point of this book is that Don Quixote read so many of them that he basically went nuts, and that's a pretty good way to parody a genre of literature, I think. In fact, chapter 6 of the story is a barely disguised list of books and basically what Cervantes thought about them, in this genre. It's basically after Quixote falls down and they have to basically carry him home. He's still ranting and raving and resting to recover his strength, and a curate and a barber, the barber being a person who does medical stuff back in that time, decide to go into his room and look at all of his book collection, and they decide to figure out, we should burn this book, but keep this book, but burn these 6 books, and keep this 1 book, and burn these 18 more books, and keep this 1 book. It's a very funny little chapter. So, in this book, for what I've read so far, here's what I can tell you. Quixote is portrayed by the narrator as a madman in general. He's possessed by a desire to recreate these romantic chivalry books. He finds his old armor from years and years ago, and he ineptly fixes it up. In fact, quote, it, speaking parenthetically, his armor, had no closed helmet, nothing but a simple morion. This deficiency, however, what his ingenuity supplied, for he contrived a kind of half-helmet of pasteboard, which, fitted onto the morion, looked like a whole one. So, he's not even doing a good job of restoring this old venerable piece of, or set of armor that he has. He arbitrarily decides that some random woman, who he barely even knows, is his lady, for whom he is doing these great deeds. There was, so the story goes, in a village near his own, a very good-looking farm girl with whom he had been at one time in love, though so far as is known, she never knew it nor gave a thought to the matter. ... He decided upon calling her Dulcinea del Toboso, which isn't actually her name, and so he's running around telling people that if they want to be on his good side, that basically they have to go find this Dulcinea del Toboso, who would not recognize that as a name that she would respond to. They have to go find her and report to her or something like that. And it's something that is commonly an element in these old chivalrous tales. He goes to an inn and he asks the innkeeper to knight him because he imagines that the inn is some kind of a castle and the innkeeper some kind of a like a duke or something like that. And so everybody in the inn sees that he's crazy, and basically he sets himself up in the stable, and he puts his armor in a trough. And he doesn't let anybody use the stable for that night. And so he beats up a bunch of guys, and the innkeeper's like, I gotta get this guy out of here. So let's just pretend to knight him and get him out of here, kind of thing. He picks fights with random people and even objects at the windmills and such. He makes these absurd demands and these weird conclusions, and he often gets himself beaten up, even just so far in the chapter. And everybody around him recognizes that he is just freaking nuts. I had a quote here. And even his descent into madness is described in a pretty funny way. Quote, the above-named gentleman, whenever he was at leisure, which was mostly all the year round, gave himself up to reading books of chivalry with such ardor and avidity that he almost entirely neglected the pursuit of his field sports, and even the management of his property, and to such a pitch did his eagerness and infatuation go, that he sold many an acre of tillage land to buy books of chivalry. There were none he liked so well as those of the famous Feliciano de Silva's composition, for their lucidity of style and complicated conceits were as pearls in his sight, particularly when in his reading he came upon courtships and cartels, where he often read passages like, further quote, "The reason of the unreason with which my reason is afflicted so weakens my reason that with reason I murmur at your beauty." Lucid indeed, right? In the first 9 chapters we get Quixote enlisting Sancho Panza. Sancho Panza is like, it's a couple of monks. There's a couple of monks going down the road, and Quixote is like, "These are evil knights," or something like that. I forget exactly what he thought they were. But Sancho's like, "No, I'm pretty sure those are monks, and I even know what monastery they're from," and he's kind of like an amused onlooker, basically. And he plays along with Quixote in some minor way, but mostly he plays along when it's when it's something that would possibly result in him getting some kind of reward later on. We even get something which was a staple of these romantic chivalrous stories at the time, which is completely fabricated, right? Obviously, Cervantes wrote this whole story himself, but basically the narrator at the end of one chapter says, "Oh, this fight that I was kind of describing, this is all I knew, except I was walking around one day and I found some kids selling pamphlets. And the pamphlets were in a foreign language, and I bought one of the pamphlets, and I translated the pamphlet, and it looked like the pamphlet was actually the story of this fight that I'm about to tell you, and I had to go and find a priest who would translate these all into Spanish for me, so I could tell you the story about this thing." It's absolute nonsense and hilarious. And random leaflets printed in another language, and I found out that, oh no, surprise, surprise, this was the part of the story that I was missing, when the whole story is a fabrication on the part of Cervantes to begin with. As I was reading this, believe it or not, the thing that it reminded me most of in like modern, I hesitate to use the word literature, modern media, is actually like the tone and the method so far are actually kind of reminiscent of like Dumb and Dumber, believe it or not. And more elevated in language, of course, but that kind of feel. People who don't know what's going on around them, doing things based on their own particular hallucinations. And like, I never thought that I would say, Don Quixote is a lot like Dumb and Dumber, but that's what I get from reading these first 9 chapters. There are puns galore. And one thing I'll note, there will be links in the description to the book. I found a 2-volume version of the Ormsby translation on Archive, which is in pretty good shape. There is a Project Gutenberg version of the Ormsby translation, but as far as I can tell, that Gutenberg version either removes or moves to the very end of the book all of the footnotes by Ormsby, which are important to understanding various historical references that are being made in the book that you won't get unless you happen to be an expert in 16th century Spain. So they're important, basically, and the Gutenberg version doesn't have them in line, maybe has them at the end of the chapter or something, I don't know, but I couldn't find them easily, so definitely want to look for a PDF version of this, which I'll have links to. Bottom line is, this has been fun so far. I like Ormsby's poking fun at previous translators of the book. I like the book itself. The stories are fun, not too complicated or and it's just silliness. It's just like very old humor, but still actually quite funny these days. So I'm going to continue reading. Maybe I'll make a few more videos with some highlights as I go along, but I just thought that it'd be fun to put down some links to these books because they're free now. At least the Ormsby version is free in certain, as long as you're not looking at something that has a foreword written by some modern guy, right? But the Ormsby stuff was originally printed in 1885, so it's all public domain at this point. Anyway, Don Quixote. Fun, weird, goofy, and full of bizarre, strange actions by a character who is absolutely nutty. and a famous parody of old chivalrous romances. So yeah, if this sounds like something you would want to read, check the links in the description. And that's all I've got for this. Hey, it's Friday. All right. So if you like what I'm doing with the channel, if you want to help out, you know what to do. And I will see you next time. Have a good weekend, everybody.